Good morning, everybody. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our off-season The Hurricane Hub discussion for Wednesday, April 12th, 2023. And I decided to do it on a Wednesday this week because I've not posted in the last 2 weeks, and I decided, since there's a lot going on, decided why not we take a look at what's going on now and do it on a Wednesday to kind of catch up to the days that I've missed over the past few weeks. Been a little busy, but since we're now really starting to get to the meat of things, a lot of talk beginning to emerge about the hurricane season and a lot of interesting stuff. And we've already had a few predictions come out so far for the season. We'll review those later. But then we're also going to go over, other stuff such as ENSO and also severe weather, all of that coming up today. So don't worry about it. So without further ado, let's get straight to it, taking a look at how many days are out till the hurricane season, till June 1st, 50 days. And it's coming up quickly. As I said, we were 60 days at the beginning of the month, 60 something days. Now we're at 50 days, and before you know it, those 50 days are going to go by really quickly, and we'll be at hurricane season. And hurricane season will be upon us. So, as I like to say, now is really the time to start watching everything. And as always, as we start off, let's take a look at the SST anomalies across the whole globe to see what's going on. MDR, Atlantic, still very warm, and we're going to come back to this in a little bit, but want to focus right now on the ENSO regions and take a look at the Pacific. And we do have, once again, that very warm area off the Central America, the South American coast, not Central America. And this is really interesting because some of these anomalies are starting to approach well off the scale. Some of these dark red anomalies, almost brown anomalies, that's reaching at the top of the scale, and this is very interesting. And I actually have a statistic on that by Ben Knoll. You'll see in a little bit, but bottom line is the Pacific has generally been warming, and the El Nino that everybody's been talking about is starting to make progress. But I'm very interested in this very cold northern Pacific look, and this is still kind of a symptom of La Nina, because La Nina kind of helped the northern Pacific flip, and we've been in a cold phase in the northern Pacific for the last few years, especially in correspondence to the La Nina that we've had. And I still find it very interesting that even though we have a developing El Nino, or supposedly, you never know what could happen, we still have this very cold northern Pacific look. On top of that, a very warm AMO Atlantic look. If you remember from March, how warm this Atlantic was, and how some people were saying it was starting to rival the look of '05 and '10 and 2010. It's still there. We still have this very warm eastern Atlantic, and it's still very warm right near the Canary Current off the northern coast of Africa, and it's also very warm in the Gulf. The Gulf has been warm the entire winter, but the general idea is a very warm look to the Atlantic and the very cold northern Pacific look, despite El Nino developing. And it's raising a lot of questions. Everybody's starting to wonder, what could really happen? Because we've never had a year that truly had a very warm Atlantic and a very favorable Atlantic look in SST anomalies, but also a developing El Nino and what could be maybe a pretty sizable, decent El Nino, especially by these anomalies off the coast of South America. We'll go over that in a little bit, but just want to give you a brief kind of mapping of how ENSO works. If you're not familiar with ENSO, it's basically broken up into a few regions. The Nino 1-2 region, which is where these very warm anomalies are, and I'll give you statistics on that later, as I said. And then there's the Nino 3 and the Nino 4, and then there's the Nino 3.4 region, which is where we look at for ENSO events, La Nina, El Nino. This is the region right here between, I guess, 170 west and 120 west. That's where the anomalies count the most. And let's take a look at what's going over there right now. The Nino 3.4 index is basically at neutral, and it has been since March, since we exited this La Nina. We've been at neutral, and we haven't been in La Nina territory at all since February. So quite a bit of time that we're away from La Nina, and certainly within that time we've also been developing atmospherically towards El Nino. And some of the things we could look at for is the SOI. This is a good indicator for atmospheric pressures in relation to ENSO. Take a look at the last 30-day average at negative 0.51, so we're basically at neutral with the SOI. Kind of did tank a little bit. We went gone down to a 30-day average of -4 just a few days ago. Kind of went back up a little bit, but still we're not as strong as where we used to be. If you remember earlier in the year during the winter, we were at a SOI average that was 30-day average that was all the way up in the strong positives, and everybody was, questioning whether or not that could mean maybe some sort of kind of, pause of El Nino development or kind of slow El Nino development. But we've kind of really tanked the SOI, and that's in response to this developing, shift in the ENSO closer towards El Nino. That's what we've seen in response, and the 30-day average too, also at 5 points. So we've seen a slow decrease in the 90-day average. I'm at 90-day average. 90-day average, of course, tends to go slower than the 30-day average. It obviously averages a larger portion of time, so it has more data to look at and average over. And we've really only been in this developing new ENSO pattern since only since the beginning of the year, when we saw all of this begin to tank and go more towards this neutral El Nino atmospheric phase, where everything is trending in the direction favorable of El Nino. So obviously the 90-day average would be a little high right now. We're still at 5 points above normal, but the bottom line I would like to say is we're starting to see a downtrend, and we've been having a consistent downtrend over the last few months with the SOI. So the atmosphere is responding to this development, and not only that, well, the SSTs have been responding as well. Ben Knoll saying the El Nino Costero, basically the coastal situation going off of Peru and Ecuador, sea surface temperature anomalies are locally 5 to 7 degrees Celsius. That's quite, really reaching there above average. And the marine heat wave conditions remain widespread. And the only time this was higher in April was in 1998 and 1983, 2 years where we had a very significant El Nino occur. And then I also found this tweet from Leon Simmons, where he tweeted, or he or she, I don't know, looks like a he, like March or April could end up higher than any of the other El Nino events of the past 70 years. And this is where we are in 2023 right now. And take a look at, I'm going to zoom in on this graph. Very interesting graph, and I found it very interesting. 2023 and 2024 were basically higher at any point so far than we have been since all, and these are all listed as big, these are all listed in big El Nino years. Actually, there's one La Nina year in here. This is 2010 to 2011, although I'm not sure if he meant 2009 to 2010, because that was El Nino. And then there's 1997 and 98. There's 2015 and 16, and look at where they all are in comparison to where we are right now. They were all much more further down on the scale than where we are right now, which basically puts into perspective what's going on out here by the coast of South America. It is very warm, and it is very indicative of a developing El Nino for sure. And we could also see that in response to the zonal winds. Here's take a look at the zonal wind anomalies, and this is a good indicator, especially for looking at the trade winds helping with mixing and cooling of the waters. And this is the beginning of the GFS forecast for the next few days, and you can see these reds. This is representative of stronger westerly anomalies. And how does this work? How do these anomalies work? Basically, when we have westerly anomalies, the bottom line is it helps kind of mix up the water and warm it. As for easterly anomalies, which is represented in the blues, that helps mix up the water and cool it and allow them to cool, while westerly anomalies, we have energy from the west transfer to the east, and that's what helps develop this El Nino that is occurring right now. And another place that a lot of people are talking about it is on Storm 2K. They've been saying, as Ben, and this is where I got the tweet from, this is from Larry Weather. He says, as Ben says, the only time on record in April that we had a Nino 3.4 that was higher than Nino 1 and 2 that was higher than now was 1998 and 1993. Um, and then he also listed a bunch of the anomalies that we've had over the last few years, and a lot of people are talking about it and saying, this could be possibly a developing El Nino that we could be seeing occurring within the next few months. And that is also reflected in some predictions that have come out too by Tropical Storm Risk. They have released their prediction over the last, I think it was last week. They released it on April 6th, and that was, yeah, definitely last week. They said they believe we'll have 12 storms, 6 hurricanes, and 2 majors. And let me see where they mentioned, but I think they're saying their forecast probably because of El Nino and expected El Nino to develop. But we do have this factor right here that I'm watching very closely, this very warm eastern Atlantic. And I found interesting that the University of Arizona is possibly taking that into consideration with predicting 19 storms, 9 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes with the ACE of 163 points. And I don't know what exactly they're saying for this, but I guess they've said that we expect an active season over the North Atlantic with the highest SST since 2010 and even warmer than 2020. And this is very interesting because it really does kind of show the uncertainty that we have. Of course, we have a lot of people saying the El Nino is very warm, and that looked like it could come on pretty decently this year, and we're already seeing very warm anomalies in the ENSO regions. But there's also something to take into consideration with the very warm Atlantic too, because sometimes we've had in the past years where there was a year that was expected to develop into an El Nino. We did see talk of El Nino and confidence for it as well, but the Atlantic was also very warm, and it kind of helped suppress the development of that El Nino to occur, and we ended up having a very active hurricane season that year. It's happened multiple years in the past. Of course, people might say that those years had a little bit less favorable conditions than we do this year for El Nino to develop, but still very interesting to see how this progresses, because as reflected at least between the difference between the TSR and University of Arizona forecasts, they're really, they're taking into these factors, but they have different opinions on it, maybe. And I think this is something that we really need to watch very closely over the next few weeks as well, because a lot of people, I'll tell you right now, a lot of people are really going to be watching for this El Nino, especially since it's known as a big factor to suppress hurricane development. But then we have to see how this develops over here, because warm SSTs in the Atlantic is something that we very much know as a favorable factor for us here, not only just for hurricanes to develop, but in some ways atmospherically too. And I find this very interesting, and I'd say that this year, especially with what happens, it's really tricky. I've really not seen a year where, both have been warm at the same time, and it looks like it could be a possibility. Climate models are also saying as well that the Atlantic will probably be warm through the peak and most of the hurricane season as well. So very interesting times ahead, and we'll be watching things very closely when it comes to these two factors, and especially that we're 50 days away from the hurricane season, and the anomalies in the Atlantic are still very warm. I really don't think that the warm side of the Atlantic, the warmer part of the Atlantic, the warm SST anomalies in the Atlantic, from now till hurricane season, at least the early part of the season or whatever, I don't think that's going to change at all whatsoever, and they'll probably get warmer over the next few weeks as, of course, we get closer towards summer. And, of course, as we have the African monsoon kick in, the Atlantic SSTs will probably give in the boost even further and probably warm from there up until the peak season. So whatever is going to occur in the Atlantic is very interesting, for sure. But taking a look at the anomalies, the actual sea surface temperature anomalies, those two also remain very warm. Taking a look at the Gulf, 26 degrees Celsius, basically stretching in halfway through the Gulf, And then we also have these warm anomalies, 27 degrees Celsius, all already beginning to stretch into the Gulf too from the Caribbean. This is associated with the loop current. And I say time and time again, even if we don't have an active hurricane season, maybe because of El Nino, the Gulf is very warm. And if we look back at the anomalies here, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies in the Gulf, they're very warm, and they'll definitely fuel any sort of developing storm coming in. They don't really necessarily impact the amount of numbers that occur in the season, but especially for fuel and energy in the atmosphere in the Gulf of Mexico, whatever does come in this year there definitely looks pretty interesting for sure. And not only when it comes to hurricane season, but severe weather season as well. And I think it's already been proven to be the case that the Gulf of Mexico is very warm and very moist over the last few weeks, especially with, the multiple devastating tornadoes we've had. If you remember those multiple devastating tornadoes over the last few weeks by pretty potent severe weather outbreaks. We just had one at the start of the month that produced up to 100 tornadoes within the last within a 24-hour time period, if you remember that one. And I told you, it's because of this very warm Gulf of Mexico. There's a lot of latent heat in the atmosphere, and when it comes to severe weather, those things are fueled very well by very warm atmosphere and good moisture, and that's what we have in the Gulf of Mexico, especially with these very warm sea surface temperature anomalies. And it's mid-April. We still have the rest of April to go and into May, and as we know, severe weather season from then will really begin to kick up, and that's when we'll possibly see the bigger chance for tornadoes to occur as well. So don't let your guard down. We're definitely not over with severe weather season as well. And even in the southeast, it's very warm too. 25, even some 26 degrees Celsius already beginning to pop up just off the coast of the Carolinas. Not quite up to the shelf water yet. That typically happens, I'd say, around May or June or July, somewhere around closer to that summer time period. That's when we start to see these waters stretch to the shelf waters, but still very close. And that's kind of also a symptom too of the very warm southeast we've had this year, and also in response to the very warm Gulf of Mexico as well. I mean, it's the Gulf Stream that this is off the southeast coast, and it's connected to the Gulf of Mexico, so I guess it kind of makes sense, that we're also very warm off the southeast coast too, but it's very warm there. And I'd imagine, if there's some sort of storm that comes up the east coast, it'll have very warm energy, especially from the loop currents, so in the Gulf Stream. So something to keep in mind as well. And since we're on the topic of severe weather in the Gulf of Mexico, marginal risk for severe weather today along the Gulf Coast. Not much going on, but then day 2, we start picking up, just really quickly going over the severe weather since it is still severe weather season. Marginal risk for the southeast of Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. And then day 3, it begins to pick up. I think there's a slight risk, right? Yep, there's a slight risk for severe weather in the plains, Texas, Oklahoma, and I think that's Kansas. Yeah, pretty sure that's Kansas. Slight risk for them, and I think I saw a risk for day 4. Yeah, risk for day 4, then day 5, and then the rest is predictability too low. But it is April, and there probably will be something that does pop up within that time frame, just a little far out for now. But it is April. We are in severe weather season, so there's definitely likely going to be severe weather past day 4 for sure. But of course, watch and see what happens. And of course, with this warm Gulf, you never know what could happen within the next few weeks. It's all very interesting and something we need to watch very closely, besides hurricane season as well. But of course, we are 50 days from hurricane season, and I'm telling you, time goes by quick. If you didn't believe me, it does go by quickly, and before you know it, we're going to be in hurricane season. And it's just a battle between El Nino and whatever happens with the Atlantic and how warm it is. I'm telling you, it's going to be a very interesting kind of mash, I guess, because those are two factors that will, I believe, and will atmospherically, I believe, collide with each other. And whatever happens this year, it's going to be very tricky, and we'll have to watch very closely. And on that note, if you want my full opinion on that, because I'm definitely really, really, eager to give my opinion, my forecast is, my official forecast at least for the 2023 season, is coming out exactly 1 week from today, Wednesday next week, April 19th, I'm going to release my preliminary 2023 hurricane season forecast. If you remember in December, I did a qualitative discussion kind of going over what factors to look for the off season as we get towards hurricane season. Well, I'm actually going to release my official forecast now, Wednesday next week, 1 week from today, April 19th. So mark your calendar if you want to see it. It's going to be released in the late afternoon, evening. I'm going to release it then, and then of course, comment what you think, comment your prediction if you want to, and give me your opinion as well. But I'm going to give my opinion next week on Wednesday, so stay tuned for that if you want to see it. And if you also want to see more predictions, I believe CSU, Colorado State, Philip Klotzbach is releasing his prediction tomorrow, Thursday. I think it's going to be in the morning, and of course I'm off from school. It's spring break, so I'm probably going to be able to post then. So I'll go over that tomorrow when he releases his predictions, whatever he releases. We'll go over that too. So busy time ahead. Hurricane season is coming up very soon, 50 days away, and definitely everything that we need to start watching now has to start. We have to start watching now, because now is when we really start getting an idea of what this season could be like. Now is a time where we start watching the factors really closely, especially since we're in April and the spring predictability barrier by now is definitely past. So really is now is when we start getting more of an idea to prepare, to look for the season, and also prepare. That's what I meant to say. But bottom line, we got to start watching now, before it is too late, because whatever happens, you can't be quite sure of what occurs. But that is it for this discussion. Of course, as I said, I'm going to probably post tomorrow. Depends on what happens with CSU, but probably we'll try to get a chance to post tomorrow. I'll try to post in the morning. If not, in the afternoon. We'll see. But if you want to stay tuned for it, of course, subscribe, click notifications, and like. As I always say, it's basically the way to go, especially if you want to keep on top of something on someone's channel. You got to subscribe, and you got to like, and you got to click notifications. Also good to, help develop a community, which is what I do plan to do here. And that's my entire goal of this, is build a community and track the weather. That's what I have as a plan for all of this, and that's my intention. So with that being said, I'm going to get out of here. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great afternoon, and maybe we'll talk again tomorrow. If not, we'll talk again Saturday.